Welcome to a very monumental episode of Cooking with Glenn. Why is this monumental, you may be asking? Well, one, it's been ages since I've done an episode of Cooking with Glenn. I've been wanting to bring this back, I just haven't had the time to do it. Two, we're looking at episode 10 here, and it may have taken about 3 years to get here, but we're doing this. And three, we're cooking one of my favorite meals today, baby back ribs. Now, how do I cook my ribs? Because many people have asked me that because they've seen my social media posts and they just all think my ribs look delicious. So that's going to be a little bit of a trick of the trade I'm going to show you guys here today. Now, I usually prepare my ribs differently each time, different barbecue sauces, different spices. But today, we're going to be seasoning this bad boy up with some black peppercorns. We're going to be topping it off with some ShopRite Trading Company Pale Ale BBQ Sauce, which you're not going to really be able to find unless you're in the upper east coast of the United States where ShopRite's a thing. And we're going to be seasoning this bad boy with some Jake's Grillin' pork rub and some rib rack spiced pork rub. Now, why are we using two different seasonings, you may be asking yourself? Well, they have very different ingredients. So let's look at rib rack first. In rib rack, we have spices, salt, garlic powder, dehydrated onion powder, chipotle pepper. And in Jake's, we have some more interesting flavors. We have sugar, paprika, coffee grounds, salt, garlic, onion, black pepper, cumin, parsley, mustard, and cayenne pepper. Now, I like this seasoning for a little bit of reasons. Well, for one, the coffee grounds in here gives the ribs a little bit of a smoky flavor and gives the ribs a little bit more of a bold flavor, as well as everything else in here adds for bringing the flavor out in a way that kind of makes it stand out a little bit more than rib rack. But why are we using rib rack? Well, having things in here like the onion, the garlic powder, and the chipotle pepper will add a little bit of a kick to it and bring out more of the flavor of the ribs and just gives it an overall better taste. So what you're going to want to do first is, of course, wash your hands before handling any raw meat. And I've done this already, but on the bottom side of the rack of ribs, there is going to be what's a membrane. Now, that may sound weird, but it's basically the silver lining that coats like the back of any rack of ribs. Some grocery stores may serve them already like taken off, but you're going to want to take a knife or scissors and just cut that away so it helps the ribs not cook better, but so when you're eating them, you don't get that chewiness that the membrane gives. And overall, it's really not recommended, at least in my aspect, to eat the membrane. It's kind of weird of a texture and whatnot. But the first thing we're going to do, I already have the oven preheated to 275, and we're doing 275 for a little bit of a reason. Now, when you cook ribs lower temperature for longer, I've noticed you get more tender ribs, you get a juicier flavor, and they kind of just come out better in terms of being closer to be fall off the bone. When you cook ribs at a higher temperature, it kind of, I want to say, dehydrates them and it makes everything harder to get off the bone. And I don't really like my ribs chewy to the extent where like they'll get stuck in my teeth and whatnot. So with that being said, we're going to start seasoning this. You know what? First, I want to throw on the rib rack seasoning on the bottom. It doesn't really matter how you throw this on, in what order. And you guys can obviously use whatever other seasonings you want to use. This is just my little special way of doing this. Now, you're going to want to, obviously, when this is all done, start spreading the seasonings out. I'm going to take a little bit of these black peppercorns and we're going to shake them or, grind them into here just to get a little bit of that nice black pepper flavor. And then we're going to go here to Jake's Grilling pork rub. Now, this is obviously going to pour out uneven because of just the nature of the spice rub. But once it starts coming out, it's usually good. So what you're going to want to do past that is you're going to start massaging the seasonings just so that they can be even around the rack of meat. Add more if need be. I'm probably going to need to add a little bit more because you don't want any part of the ribs just not to have that flavor you're looking for. I tell you offhand, combining these two seasonings definitely gives it a little bit of a weird scent coming off, and I really can't put my hand on what that scent's going to end up being because it's just odd. So you're going to want to definitely hit every little inch on here with seasoning. You could tell, you know, a rack of ribs is definitely a 2 to 3 person meal. I usually will prepare this and, you know, refrigerate it overnight, eat it 2 separate days. And, you know, ribs as a delicacy that you only have them once in a while is always good, I think. So we're not going to obviously put the barbecue sauce on now because you want to let the ribs kind of marinate within the seasoning. Now, how I prepared this, I put 2 layers of tin foil on this baking sheet. Why 2? Well, the next step you're going to want to do is kind of wrap these ribs a little bit and let them cook that way, almost as if they were on, I want to say like a grill, but not so much, but it's going to allow the heat to kind of conduct over it. What I'm going to also do is get another piece of tin foil because I didn't pull enough off and just place it over the top of these sides so that, you know, everything is covered while it cooks. This will also allow the juices to kind of stay contained within this rack. And then eventually when we need to unwrap it all, the juices will stay within that tin foil. It'll kind of keep it a little less messy. So I've already preheated the oven. We're going to get a trusty, handy-dandy oven mitt here. And we're going to throw this in the oven. We're going to do about 2.5 hours just to make sure everything is fully cooked all the way through. And then I'm going to come back to you guys. We're going to get to the barbecue sauce portion of it. We're going to start wiping everything down. Not wiping everything down, but, you know, layering that barbecue sauce on it. And then we're going to caramelize the barbecue sauce onto the ribs. And then after that, everything should be looking as delicious as it smells already. So I'm going to come back to you guys. We're going to put this in the oven. We're going to set this oven. And it's going to be time to rest, to relax for a little bit while this all cooks. All right, guys, and 2.5 hours later, we're back. And you can see these ribs are mostly cooked, but something's missing. And what is that? The barbecue sauce. So we're going to crack open this Pale Ale BBQ sauce I mentioned earlier. And surprisingly enough, I can't find my my brush for these ribs. So we're going to have to do this a little messy and try to spread it out with a spatula as best as we can. So I've never had this barbecue sauce before. I don't really know what I'm getting into, but I'm a big fan of a lot of the ShopRite Trading Company stuff. Especially when they come out with different varieties and flavors like this. So this should be very interesting. If we could get the cap off properly. All right, there we go. So let's make sure this is going to be nice and good. There we go. And it smells nice and sweet, I'll tell you that. I don't know if it's supposed to, but it does. So what we're going to do here is generously, if this stuff wants to come out, there we go. Start to kind of throw it all over the rack of ribs. I like to make, if I can, like 3 separate rows. I think it kind of makes it easier to spread out in the long term. And you want to make sure you hit every spot. So that should be good enough for this. Now let's work on spreading this out as much as possible. Just so, you know, it kind of gets everywhere. And you want to be sure you're covering your whole rack of ribs, you know, for definitely the most flavor. Some of it's going to, you know, end up sliding all over the place. But at least by doing this, we'll be able to kind of see, you know, if we need to add more. And what I'm going to do after this, once I make sure I hit all the different spots, is we're gonna throw a little bit more spices on it. Not that it needs it, I don't think, but I like my rack of ribs to kind of look pretty and have that spice look to it. I mean, that's clearly all cosmetic, but you know, it's really no big deal. You got to make sure you don't put too much of the spices on it for the sheer fact that you don't want it coming off overly like salty, I guess you could call it, because certain times when you have too much like onion powder and salt and sugar, you don't want to fully take away from what the meat tastes like and only get, you know, bunches of seasonings. But I believe by doing this the way I'm going to end up doing it, everything should come out tasting nice. I just added those little finishing touches there of the barbecue sauce. And you know what? I got some in my hand here. We're going to get a nice little taste of that barbecue sauce. And surprisingly enough, well, not surprisingly, but it tastes really good. I'm a big fan of it. And I'm not normally that much of a fan of barbecue sauce. It usually doesn't work with the type of foods I like. You know, of course, during the summer months, barbecue sauce goes great with a lot of different things, especially when you're grilling. So, you know, certain aspects it's fine. It's not my go-to. I'm definitely a ketchup guy first and foremost. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to hit those seasoning spots one more time just to get it covered, and it's going to give it a nice little look when it comes out of the oven the second time. So what we're going to do, as I said earlier, we're not going to really bake it again. What we're going to do for the last 15 to 20 minutes is we're going to want to broil these. Now, I know a lot of people on a normal recipe probably don't broil that much. Let me get a paper towel. Because, I mean, I don't. I bake something and then, you know, that's it. So by broiling this here right now, we're actually going to allow the barbecue sauce to kind of caramelize a little bit, everything to more or less go back into it, and give the ribs hopefully a nice look to them. Gonna want to just spread out some of this seasoning a little bit. So, like I mentioned, we're gonna broil for about 15 to 20 minutes. We'll come back, we'll have the finished product, we'll do a little bit of a taste testing, and we'll see just how well these ribs came out. So let me set this over to broil now. We'll broil it on high, do a timer for, let's go with 18 minutes. And I'm going to throw these back in here. I'll see you. Well, it's going to seem like nothing because of editing, but let's get ready for this finished product. It's over, and these ribs came out looking delicious. The barbecue sauce and the spices topped this thing perfectly, or at least perfectly in my opinion. I'm not a chef. I'm just some guy in this kitchen trying to make good food for all of you to see. Now, what would be a Cooking with Glenn episode without me trying the finished product? So I've already gone ahead. I've cut off a piece of this rib, and I figure we might as well pick it up. It is kind of hot. As you can see, the meat is still kind of tender, but we're going to see just how well this came out. Now, as you guys can see, these ribs, I'm in love with them. They taste fantastic. The different spices, the different sauce, all comes together to make a very delicious tasting rib. The meat is still kind of tender. I probably could have cooked them a little bit lower for them to fully start coming off the bone. But the way they came out, isn't bad. I only make ribs once in a blue moon. It's definitely not something I've fully perfected yet. But with every little time, the recipe gets a little bit better. And it's very tasty. So, with that being said, that's episode 10 of Cooking with Glenn. I showed you the way I make my ribs. They look good. They taste good. I definitely recommend using different types of rubs and seasonings with it, just so you can get a full-fledged flavor. And also cook it in a way where the meat flavor itself, the ribs flavor, comes out within those seasonings and they don't seem separated. Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe. Until next time, hopefully episode 11 doesn't take too long to get out, but I'll catch you later. Have a good one.